So we're on page 78. Vayera. Vayera love Hashem. Hashem appears where? Be'alone Mare. And the woods that was owned by Mare. Why does he do that? Because Avram was sitting at the edge of his tent in the middle of the hot day. So Hashem appears to Avram in where he is in the woods here, owned by a person named Mare. V'yasa einav, he looks up, Avram looks up, Vayera v'hine shlosha anashim nitzavim alav, and he sees three men standing above him. V'yaretz, he sees them, he runs, the crossam pesach, he runs out from the entrance of his tent, v'yishtachu ars, and he bows down to them. So here the picture is that Hashem comes to visit Avraham, who is recuperating from surgery for his circumcision. Avraham, instead of being inside the house in his hospital bed, is sitting at the entrance of the house, looking to see if he can find anybody that he can welcome into his house and teach about God. Right? At the same time that God is there visiting him, because you should always visit the sick, Abraham is trying to do this mitzvah. God knows that Abraham wants to, so he makes it very hot so that nobody will come and bother him. Now, and what happens then, of course, is Avram sits in the heat. And he doesn't care. He's going to try to find someone. So Hashem gives in, so to speak, and he sends three men. We later find out those three men are angels, but now there's three. It says three men. And it says the three men were standing over Abraham. Right? So he goes out there and he bows down to them, and he says, "V'yomer Adoni," he says, "My masters, if you would like, Tavor me'al avdecha, please come, take a little bit of water, let me wash your feet for you, come sit by my tent, and let me give you some bread and some other things to eat." Right? And then it says then Abraham goes back to the tent, and he tells his wife, please make cake, make bread, and he goes and he gets his sons to help him slaughter a cow, and he brings them food to eat. Right? And it says in the last line on this page, on 78, it says, "V'yitain lifneim," and he put the food in front of him. V'hu omed aleim, and he stood above them. Tachas ha'etz v'yachelu, under the tree, and they all ate. So these three men, who are really angels, but Abraham thinks they're men, are coming, and Abraham is doing what he likes to do, which is he wants to do the mitzvah, brings them into his home, gives them something to eat, gives them the ability to relax, gives them a drink, takes care of their animals, and then he talks to them about monotheism, about one God. If you notice, I stressed a few things when I read it. One was that when the angels were coming, it says that they stood above him. Then in the last line it says that he puts food in front of them. Then it says that he stood above them. Abraham stood above them. So, of course, it's an expression. Right? It doesn't necessarily mean that he stood above them. It means when Abraham looked out, he saw up in the distance. That's what it means. They stood above him. Right? And here, they're seated, and he's serving them, so he stands above them. But the Torah is telling us another message, which is that at first, Abraham looks out, and he sees these angels. These angels are spiritual entities. They're not humans. They're the will of God manifest in this world. He sees that, and they're on a higher spiritual level than him. So he says they are standing above him, right? They're above him. He's down here in the world. He is a human. A human is part spiritual and part physical. And the angels, who are all spiritual, are standing above him. But then he goes through this whole process of getting food and having bread made and slaughtering an animal and putting it in front of them to eat. And now it says he's standing above them. Because the Torah is teaching us that when a human being takes the physical world, takes food, takes bread, takes meat, and uses it for a mitzvah, then we can do something that angels can't do. Angels can only be spiritual. We can take physical and make it spiritual. And in our doing that, right, we are become greater than the angels. And that's why it says here that Abraham stood over them. Because they now understood, as Abraham understood, that because of my ability to grow and change and to use the world, I can do more than the angels. And he stood above them as they all ate. Of course, Abraham didn't realize that they were angels. He thought they were humans. Angels, for instance, cannot eat. And Abraham fed them. So we have another question this is the example, the textbook example that we always use of inviting people to your home. Right? There's a mitzvah that you should have people into your home, just like Abraham had people into his home. How do we know? This case here. Here he goes, he's sitting outside in pain after surgery, trying to get people to come visit him, to come into his home. It's very important to him, and we, being his offspring, should do the same. However, the example the Torah gives is the one example that is the worst possible example. Because any other example is, I see three guys walking in the desert. They're clearly got to be hungry. They've got to be thirsty. They need a place to rest. So I'm going to invite them into the shade. I'm going to give them food. I'm going to give them drinks. I'm going to let them rest, right? And now they won't be hungry. They won't be thirsty, and they'll be awake, right? But not angels. Angels don't eat. Angels don't sleep. Angels don't drink. So even though Abraham didn't know they were angels, the Torah picks this as the perfect example of inviting people to your home. But it's not the perfect example. It's the worst example. Because when you invite people to your home, you're feeding them because they're hungry. You're giving them drinks because they need to drink. You're giving them a place to rest because they have to rest. You're helping them wash because they need to be clean. All human beings need that. So that's why we do it. So what kind of kindness am I doing to somebody when it isn't kindness at all? The angels don't eat, so I can give them food all day. They can only pretend to eat. They don't drink, they only pretend to drink. They don't have to sleep, they don't have to do anything. So of all the examples for the Torah to give us an example where Abraham found a poor bum on the street and gave him food and drink, and the guy was so appreciative and listened to him and became a great leader. But no, they give us the one example that the people don't benefit at all from what he does. And that teaches us a lesson. That when we do an act of kindness, that should benefit people. But even if it didn't benefit them, if that was our intent, we still have accomplished a deed of kindness. Even though those angels didn't have to eat, it was still chesed, it was still kindness that Abraham did, because he thought they had to eat. If somebody comes to my home and I prepare food, let's say I get a call, can so-and-so stay at your house this weekend? They need a place to stay, they want to be in the area. So I say, sure. Let them stay at my house. I prepare food, I make the bed, I set everything up, and they don't show up. So did I do chesed or not? So according to what it's saying here, I did. Because I did everything I could, the rest is up to them, just like the angels. Abraham does everything he can to do kindness. The fact that they don't need to eat, he prepared it. He gets the mitzvah. He does the good deed. The good deed that changes our personality, that makes us better people, does not matter if the person receiving it needed it or not. It means it's all based on our action and our desire. So as long as we want to do it, regardless of what the person needs, we accomplish it. That's what that story tells us. Now, the angels come and they have things to tell him. One of the things...
Sorry.
Yeah?
Why under the tree?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons is the word tree is eshel, which is an abbreviation for A is achila, to eat, shin in the middle is shina, to sleep, and lamed is lina, which is to accompany someone. So that it's the three mitzvahs that we learn from Abraham is that somebody comes, you give them food and drink, you give them a place to sleep, and then when they leave, you walk out with them so they shouldn't go alone. That's where it comes from.
Thank you.
So we have here that so these angels come, right? And they're starting to tell him what are they here for. It says in the top of 81, where's Sarah? He says she's in the tent. They said, I'm going to come back this time next year and Sarah will have a baby. Right? And now Sarah hears it and she doesn't believe it. But Abraham and Sarah were old, well on in years. The manner of woman had ceased to be with Sarah. She was post-menstrual. She's not going to have a baby. And Sarah laughs. She says, after I have withered, shall I again have delicate skin and my husband is old? You're not going to have kids. Now God hears this. This was an example I gave last week of a case where it appears that there's a lie. Because God says to Abraham, why is Sarah laughing, saying, shall I in truth bear a child though I have aged? It doesn't say anything about, she says, that Abraham is old. Right? So God is not being honest with him. It's called a sin of omission. He's leaving out what she said. So why does God tell Abraham this? He tells Abraham because Abraham needs to help educate his wife, Sarah in this case, to better understand God's ability to do anything he says. On the other hand, he had no reason to tell Abraham that Sarah called him old. All that would do is make Abraham feel bad. So therefore, God doesn't say that. This teaches us the whole concept of how lying works, which is there are certain circumstances in order to benefit others where you're allowed to lie within certain boundaries. And this is an example of it, because it had absolutely no purpose for Abraham to hear his wife say that, but it was necessary for him to know that Sarah needed to understand. So that's why it was. Then it says the men got up and they looked out towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them. Like I said before, one of the things we're supposed to do in the mitzvah is to accompany a person when they leave. So that's where he does it. And God says, should I not tell Abraham what I'm about to do to Sodom? Well, that's a funny question. God, we know God's going to destroy Sodom. Why does he have to tell Abraham? What purpose does God have to tell Abraham? He says, should I not tell him? Well, why do you have to tell him? Does God have to tell Abraham everything? So God's going to destroy Sodom, and it's a done deal. He's going to do it. He already says he's going to do it. Now, if he tells Abraham, what good is there to tell him? It just make Abraham feel bad. But the fact is that it'll cause Abraham to pray, and he does. And he prays for 50 people. If there's 50 good people, no, 40, 30, goes on to 10. There's not even 10 good people, and God does not change his mind. But the fact that God tells him this, even though it was a done deal, was because God wanted to solicit one thing, Abraham's prayers. Not because God needs to hear how great he is. It's because Abraham needed to pray. Prayer is an important part of our psyche, of who we are, and it has an effect in the world. And God is saying a very interesting thing. Here's my first example of telling you the importance of prayer. In one case where I'm telling you now, if you pray, it won't help. I'm still going to destroy Sodom. But nevertheless, the example the Torah gives us is that Abraham goes and prays, and even though God says no, Abraham's prayers have an effect. They do make a difference. That even if this had to happen, that's still what God was going to do, and that's why he tells him this, where normally he might not. So if we look on 85, we have the angels coming to Sodom. So now it says that they come to Sodom, and Lot was sitting at the gate, because Lot was a judge, and judges sit at the entrance to a town. That's where they used to meet. And he saw him, and he stood up, and he bowed down to them. So Lot understood who he was dealing with, angels, who he had here, right? Because he came from Abraham, even though he's fallen so far. So he says, "Now, my lords, go away. I mean, turn about, come to my house, spend the night at my house, and then you go, and then leave." And they say, "No, we'd rather stay here." And he pushes them to do so, and then he makes the matzahs, and they eat. Now, what's happening is that Lot realizes that these are holy people, and the Sodomites will kill them. So he says, "Please, don't stay out here. Come with me into my house where I can hide you, so that won't happen." So it says, they called to Lot, and they said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out." The Sodomites are yelling, "We want those 3 men. Those were angels." And Lot comes, and he shuts the door behind them, and he won't give it to them. Right? And they push and push and push and push to get them. Lot allows them to escape. Right? So here we see still some of the Lot that was the one who was close to Abraham. But we see also that he's been corrupted. Right? So it says then that at this point, the night they've been able to barricade themselves within the house. And then in the bottom of 87, it says, as dawn was breaking, the angels told Lot, "Get up, take your wife, your daughters, and get out of here." Right? So he grabbed them, and they left. And we know that they say, "Don't look back." Lot's wife looks back. She turns into a pillar. And Lot and his 2 daughters end up in a cave. As far as Lot and his 2 daughters understand, the whole world has been destroyed again. You had the story of the flood. People messed up. Here he is in Sodom. People messed up again. He believes that it's it, game over. Right? Then, and what happens here is we have that his daughters also believe it's the end of the world, and that they, in order for them to continue humankind, they have to have relations with their father, because they're the only humans left in the world. This is their conclusion. So they get Lot drunk, as you're going to see here, and he wants to get Lot gets drunk, and the daughters then, when he's in a stupor, have relations with him, both daughters. So if you look on 91 and line 35, they plied their father with wine that night, The younger one got up and laid with their father, because he didn't realize who it was. Then his two daughters conceived from their father. The older bore a son, and she named him Moab. Right? And the second one had a son, she named him Ammon. So here we have his two daughters. There was the one who came up first and the one who came second. The one who came first had a son named Moab. Moab in Hebrew means from my father. She's saying, I committed incest with my father, and she's putting it right in your face. I don't care. Because by the time she had children, this child, she realized that they made a mistake. There were people still in the world. It was only these 5 cities that were destroyed, not the whole world. Now she's pregnant, walking around with her father's child, which back then wasn't understood, was not something that people would do. So and what does she do? Instead of being embarrassed, she's very open and chutzpahdik about it. She says, this son is from my father. That's his name, so that the whole world should know. Her younger sister names her son Ammon. Ammon, right, comes from Ben Ami. It says, the son of my people. She doesn't want to say that she committed incest. So this is the child of my people, meaning her father, but she doesn't say it straight out. These two are cousins of ours, Ammon and Moab, because they come from Lot. Lot is a nephew of Abraham. But they are known in the ancient times for their promiscuity, because of how they came from this story, from his daughters. Right? Then we go on. We have if we look on 95, we get to the point where you have the birth of Isaac. There are many things in between, but we're not going to be able to get them all. So on 95 it says, Hashem remembers Sarah as he said, and he did for Sarah as he spoke. She conceived and had a son in her old age. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him Isaac. Abraham circumcised his son Isaac at 8 days. Right? Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. And Sarah says, God has made laughter for me. Whoever hears will laugh for me. And she said, who is the one who said to Abraham, Sarah would nurse children, for I have borne a son in his old age. The child grew and was weaned. So here she names the child for the fact, literally it says, because people will laugh for me, not laugh at me. But they'll be so happy for me that here I am, a 100-year-old woman, I had a baby after all these years. And so she does, and she nurses children. And the day that she nursed him and then he was weaned from his nursing, Abraham made a party. And we next have the story that comes up is the story of Hagar. Hagar is the mother of Yishmael. She was the concubine to Abraham. She had the first child that he had, Yishmael. Now what's happening is that Sarah has a son, and she says that Hagar, son, and Hagar are a problem. Hagar is acting like she's the boss. She works for me. She's a slave. But she thinks because she had the first child with Abraham that she's superior to me. So she's acting inappropriately. And the son is acting dangerously to Yitzchak, that Yitzchak could get killed by him. So she goes and wants Abraham to get rid of Hagar and Yitzchak. And so Avram is going through this until God tells him, you have to listen to her. She's right. And therefore he sends them away. Clearly Avram does not want to send them away, but he's being, he's seeing it as his family, his wife and his child, and he feels for them, and he knows their life will not be as good. But Sarah also sees this, but also realizes that they're trouble. We have to get rid of them. Now, according to the Ramban, he has a very interesting statement. He said that Sarah's reaction was to some extent an overreaction, and because of the spiritual level she was on, it was wrong for her to do this. And because of this, Ramban says, even though the action was correct, because God said it was, but that for her to do this was wrong. There was a little bit of her own feelings, because this woman had a child with my husband. So because of it, the Ramban says, this children of Hagar hate us till this day. And when that expression, till this day, is used anywhere in Torah, it means forever. And the children of Yishmael are the Arabs. This is one of the reasons why we've had this long-going fight, in that they say that our land of Israel is their land of Israel, because they say God gave it to the children of Abraham. Yishmael was the first son of Abraham. We say that the Torah tells us that God gave it to Abraham, and God told him to give it to Yitzchak, not Yishmael. but that happened because of this. That's what the Ramban says. We then have that it says on the bottom of 99. It says that Abraham planted an eshel in Beersheba, and he proclaimed the name of God there. Planting an eshel is the word we had before for tree. And eshel, right, means that Abraham wasn't just planting a tree. He was planting the whole concept of having people come to your home, of eating at your home, visiting, taking care of people, welcoming visitors, welcoming strangers. And then he did that there in Beersheba. It's interesting to note that Avram had just finished making a covenant, a military agreement with Avimelech, that they would no longer have, they would have no war and they would get along, the two peoples. They made a peace treaty. People had to ask, why would Avram make a peace treaty? Abraham had everything. He was wealthy. He had many people. Avimelech saw what Abraham did, saw who he was. He was a lower level than Abraham. Abraham had no reason to make this treaty. And we understand that Avimelech came to Abraham because he didn't want to. It wasn't that he needed to have a treaty with Abraham now. He wanted to have a treaty for the future as well, because Avimelech understood, as Avram did, that not only is Avram on top now, but in the future Avraham will become a powerful nation, and he'll have many people, and much will come from the Jewish people. So he wanted to make a covenant right now. In other words, Avimelech saw the future, understood what was going to happen, and planned today for the future. That's why it tells us right here that afterwards Abraham plants this tree in Beersheba. It's Abraham's way of planning for the future as well. Avimelech did it by making peace with an enemy, so that in the future they'd have no more fighting. Abraham uses it in order to bring kindness into the world by planting this tree, so that the future generations should understand this concept of what he was teaching people. We then have this famous case beginning on 101 here, where God tests Abraham, and he says, Abraham, where are you? He says, here I am. Take your son, your only one, whom you love, Isaac. Why does the Torah say that? He just say, take your son, or just take Isaac. Why does it say, take your son, your only one, whom you love, Isaac? So here the Torah only tells us God's statements, but Abraham was speaking to him. And this is what he says. God says to Abraham, this is another test. Take your son. So he says, which son? I have two. I have Yishmael, I have Isaac. Your only one, the one who's going to inherit from you. Isaac, the one you love. Well, I love both my sons, Yishmael and Isaac. No, Isaac. So he finally tells him who. In other words, Avram is showing that regardless of the fact that Yishmael had to be sent away because he was causing trouble, and what the future might hold, nevertheless, Avram loved his son. It was his son. And even though his son went astray, his son had many good qualities and much about him, and Avram loved him. And therefore, even here, God has to become extremely specific, because Abraham is persisting that the son I had to send away, I also love. Right? That's what he's saying. So then it says, Abraham got up in the morning, and he got his donkey, and he took his young men with him, and he went off to do what we call a Kedes Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac as a sacrifice. And it tells us here the whole story of how he goes, and Abraham takes wood, he takes fire, and takes Yitzchak, and Yitzchak says, like, what are we doing? He says, we're going to offer a sacrifice. So Yitzchak says, well, I see the wood, I see the fire, where's the sacrifice? And it says, Hashem will show you, my son. And they go up on the mountain, and he binds Isaac. Now, there's a lot of issues about this, because this is considered a test for Abraham, but I sort of wonder if it's a test for Yitzchak. Yitzchak is an adult man. He's 40 years old. And his father talks in riddles. Yeah, God will show us the sacrifice. Yitzchak knew what was going on. He knew he was going to be slaughtered. So he's a 40-year-old man, and his father's 101 years old. So if his father was going to kill him, Yitzchak simply should just fight him and get away. Like, why did he allow this? The fact that he allowed it shows you that this was a test for Yitzchak. Yitzchak allowed himself to be offered as a sacrifice. So who was it a test for, Avraham or Yitzchak? Avraham has to offer him, but Yitzchak's the one who's going to die. And here we can understand that as hard as it is to die for a cause, and I don't want to minimize it, to live for a cause is much harder than to die. I remember as a child once, one of the first times I came in contact with a group of Orthodox rabbis, they asked a question to this group of kids I was with, and they said, How many of you here, if you had a situation, would die as a Jew? If someone put a gun to your head and said either convert or die, what would you do? And the overwhelming majority of the kids in that room said we would die rather than convert. Even though they weren't observant at all. They were pretty ignorant, every one of us, of what Judaism meant. But they said it. Then they asked a question. They said, well, if you would die as a Jew, how about would you live as a Jew? And that hit me. I was maybe 10 years old, but it really hit me because that living as a Jew is much harder than dying as a Jew. As hard as it is to do this, it's over in a second. But living as a Jew is every moment of your life forever. And that's why this is a bigger test for Avraham. You imagine Avraham actually did it and kills his son. The rest of his life, he has to remember that he killed his son. His entire life, right? When we hear this in a case, you'll have a case here where a guy murders somebody and he'll say, the rest of my life I will have to live with the fact that I did this terrible thing. And the family will say, yeah, you did this terrible thing, and our husband's not here, and my father's not here anymore because of you. That's true. It's final. It doesn't come back. But the guy does have to live with it. I don't mean he should be excused. But if he's a normal person, and whatever happened, he's going to have a horrible life, right? Avram will have a horrible life if he actually kills his son. To live with that, to live with the decisions we make is much harder than dying with them. And that's really why this is a test of Abraham, as much as it was a test for Yitzchak, but at the very least. The parsha ends with more genealogy. It says in the last paragraph, it came to pass that Abraham was told, behold, Milcah too has borne children to Nachor your brother. Uz, his firstborn, or he goes here, Milcah had children with Nachor, which was the brother of Abraham. And then it goes through all of them. And then it tells you, the second to last line, and Bethuel begot Rebekah, right? Bethuel had Rivkah. And then it tells you all of the children of them. Now, Rivkah, that's what the whole paragraph's about. What this is foreshadowing in this parsha to tell us, in the next parsha, Rivkah is going to get a bit older, and she's going to meet Yitzchak, and they're going to get married. This is just telling you where she comes from. You see that Avraham, when he married someone he was related to, distant relative, right? Yitzchak is also going to. You see here, she's a distant relative. Yaakov also will. And that was because the people that Abraham came from were idol worshippers, but they were good people. The people Abraham converted, right, who you'd think that's who he'd want his son to marry because they were monotheists, they didn't worship idols, but they were much more harsh people. The Canaanites were known for being more harsh, less sophisticated. Abraham felt it is easier to change a person's beliefs than it is to change their personality. So he went after his own family to marry for his family rather than going to his followers to marry. And then he would be able to change his family. And that brings him right to the end.